this is my review of Assassination Classroom. Okay, so in this episode, the fight with Kaede ends, and then we actually get to hear Korosensei's backstory as promised. So, yeah, and this episode is actually pretty interesting because it does kind of set up where Korosensei came from. Or at least it starts off the whole story where Korosensei came from, and we actually learn a bit more about his relationship with Aguri in this episode, and we also see, we also just more or less just learn who Shiro is in this episode. At long last. We've never formally met him up to this point, but we have seen kind of glimpses into who he actually is, but now we actually find out more about him as a person. So yeah, it starts off with the fight between Kaede and Korosensei, and Korosensei is doing his best to actually keep up with Kaede and try to block her attacks. And as the other students watch on in horror, and also the other faculty, they try to watch on in horror as Korosensei battles with Kaede, and they quickly realize that Kaede is going to die if they don't do something. Korosensei then creates an afterimage of his head, pointing out that Kaede is keeping the rest of him too busy to actually divert more attention away. And through his afterimage, he then proceeds to explain his plan and about how he plans to remove the tentacles, pointing out that he realizes that Kaede's bloodlust is what's primarily fueling her tentacles' power, and that they need to find a way to stop the bloodlust so that she can actually be safely separated from the tentacles. And then points out his plan that he's going to draw her deliberately call attention to his main weak point, his heart, and in an effort to immobilize Kaede so that he can keep her pinned. And while they do that, they have to think of a way to actually call her bloodlust so that he can safely remove the tentacles. And he points out that he needs the students to actually cooperate, because he points out that he can't do it alone, and that he's grown to trust them as a teacher and student, and that if they're unable to do this, then he's very well going to die if they're not careful. So and sure enough, he does exactly that. He deliberately calls Kaede's attention to his heart, and she proceeds to go in and attack it. And while the other students begin to weigh their options, Nagisa begins to weigh all the different assassination techniques he's learned up to this point. Specifically the stun clap, the knives and guns, and a whole bunch of other things that they've learned up to this point. But he points out that almost all of them are going to be ineffective since one, they're not trying to kill Kaede, and two, he realizes that her mind is too frenzied for a stun clap to actually work. So he realizes he needs to think of a strategy, and points out that they're assassins and that they actually need to be able to prepare for any situation, and that if he can't figure something out, then Kaede is doomed. But eventually he does find an idea that he thinks will work. And sure enough, once Korosensei has been attacked in the heart, and he successfully immobilizes Kaede so that she can't attack him anymore, Nagisa then walks directly in front of her, and all of these students and the faculty look on at him and are completely curious as to what he's about to do. And sure enough, he pulls out Irina's kiss of death that he learned when she was first introduced. And everybody is understandably visibly shocked, because they didn't think, one, that Nagisa would be that brazen about kissing somebody, and sure enough, the only people who kind of just take it in stride are Ryo Nakamura, Karma, and Irina. So because Ryo and Karma mainly because they can tease Nagisa about it later, and Irina because she kind of is proud that he picked up the technique from her. But in any case, he uses the kiss of death to actually immobilize Kaede and cause her to kind of pass out from ecstasy, I guess. But as he's kissing her, he remarks to himself that he's not going to let her believe that this is all that there is to her life, and that he isn't going to let her say that's all an act, and that he knows that on a surface level that some of what she's shown them in the past year has to have been real. So, but with that, he knocks her out, and everybody gives him kudos about what he did, and including Korosensei, who was able to successfully remove the tentacles because of him. But everybody remarks that they are impressed with Nagisa's quick split decision thinking. And again, Rio and Karma actually mock him, kind of chide him a little bit, pointing out that they definitely feel like he didn't have it in him, and kind of tease him about the fact that he just kissed Kaede. Only for him to remark that he was merely trying to call her bloodlust and nothing else. At which point Irina comes over and compliments Nagisa's use of her skill, but points out that he could have done better. And then proceeds that he only got 16 hits off and could have easily gotten 40 if he really got into it. So, and all the other students then proceed to point out that their skill with the kiss of death isn't as good as well. But in any case, everybody is happy about the fact that Kaede is now going to go back to, well, not normal, but at the very least she's going to be their friend again. So they're happy with that. And Korosensei points out that although he's injured, his heart will eventually regenerate, and that they should just be patient with him for the time being. Only for a shot to ring out and just narrowly miss hitting Korosensei in the head. At which point Shiro and a man only described as Mark II to him. He points out, Shiro shows up and points out that though Korosensei can play the on death's door but idea for as long as he wants, he points out that there was always 2 assassins that he was never able to actually overcome, and then reveals himself. As it turns out, Shiro's real name is Yanagisawa, who as we'll find out a bit about his backstory, but he was hiding his face and using a voice changer the whole time to actually disguise the fact that he's actually somebody that Korosensei knows, so that Korosensei can't actually, well, track him more easily and figure out his identity. And he points out that while Korosensei may survive for now, he will die, and that Shiro will finally get vengeance for everything that Korosensei has taken from him. And with that, he and Mark II leave. So, yeah, at which point Korosensei proceeds to recover, and while he's doing that, Kaede actually wakes up, and when everybody asks how she is, she remarks that she feels fine, but also points out that the reason she acted the way she did was because she initially been driven by bloodlust, and that she wanted to actually kill Korosensei right out of the gate from the beginning and be patient. But as she was learning more about him, she realized she wanted to learn more about his story before actually killing him. But the tentacles didn't like that very much, and eventually started taking over right at that moment, which is around the time she wound up going crazy and tried to kill Korosensei. So yeah, she wasn't always. She initially did start as an act, but over time she did kind of grow together with everybody else, and eventually the tentacles got tired of waiting for her to kill Korosensei and just kind of took over. At which point Nagisa comes forward and points out that he realizes that she was wearing a mask the whole time, but points out that doesn't matter since everybody does, and that regardless of what they do, that's how they roll as assassins. Sometimes they hide things from people and try to keep things secret. And that's okay because everybody has secrets, and he's just glad that she's safe and that they can continue to be friends. At which point she begins crying and pointing out that now she no longer has to play pretend to be somebody else, and is glad that she can finally be open and honest with everybody now. So at which point Korosensei finally interjects, pointing out that he realizes now that the students have actually grown a lot in the past year, and then proceeds to tell them that now is the time for him to tell them their backstory, his backstory, pointing out that he's been spending a long time fostering trust between student and teacher, and points out that he doesn't want to break that trust anymore, and that he wants to continue to have a trust between the two of them, so that they can continue to grow together as student and teacher. And then he proceeds to tell his backstory and confesses that this is actually his first time going into being a teaching role, but also points out that he feels like he filled the role quite nicely, and at which point everybody realizes who he actually is. And sure enough, he confesses that he's actually the original Reaper. So yeah, the Reaper that we met, the assassin that tried to kill Korosensei. As it turns out, he wasn't the first Reaper. Korosensei is, and Korosensei then also explains that it's not so much that he's going to blow up and take the Earth with him, but rather that he's going to kill. That he's not going to destroy the Earth, but rather he's going to expire at the end of the year. And whether or not he goes alone or takes the Earth with him is ultimately something that the students are able to control. So, at which point he proceeds to go into his backstory, and Nagisa points out that they wanted his backstory, and they got it in spades. So, at which point we learn a bit more about Korosensei's backstory and how he came to be the Reaper before he became Korosensei. So, he proceeds to explain that he lived in a world where he lived in kind of a slummy place where everybody kind of betrayed each other, and that was kind of the order of the day. That the only way you could survive was through your strength, wit, and wits, and that's how he wound up becoming the Reaper. He became an assassin to basically make ends meet and try to keep himself from going to poverty, basically. And over time, he started using his intelligence, his strength, and his charm to assassinate different targets. And once his body count reached 1,000, he began to become known as the Reaper, and people started calling him by that moniker. He didn't really choose that name, but that's what happened. But yeah, Korosensei. Eventually it does cut to the facility where he was being held. At which point Korosensei explains what he was actually there for. So he explains that Yanagisawa was actually the man who ran the facility. Before it was destroyed, and that's where Kaede came in. But he explains that he was actually chosen to be a guinea pig because of his unique skills, and that the nature of the experiment that Yanagisawa was conducting was to synthesize antimatter inside living cells. That was ultimately his end goal, and the end result is the tentacles. Obviously, I've kind of alluded to that up to this point, and it's kind of outright stated in my last review of this. But Korosensei further iterates that Korosensei was chosen as the Reaper was chosen as a candidate because he had the strength to actually maintain the tentacles maintain the antimatter inside of himself, and the idea was to synthesize antimatter inside of a living cell and have it produce living antimatter. And as he's being experimented on, he actually is introduced to Aguri, who we meet for the first time in this episode. But Aguri is assigned to actually watch over Korosensei while he's developing and take notes, which is what Yanagisawa assigned her to do. But as we find out, there's a bit more to it than that. So I'll get to that in a minute. But effectively, Korosensei doesn't think much of her first, pointing out that she's kind of pretty, but also points out that her shirt is a little bit weird, which again she points out her students don't really like all that much either, and Korosensei then proceeds to take a bit of an interest in her. And sure enough, as the experiments continue, they slowly begin to grow closer as friends. He points out that she continues to wear the same shirt, the same brand of shirt, and he points out that she's merely trying to liven up his day despite him being annoyed by her shirt and her taste in shirts. He is ultimately kind of interested to learn more about her life and her teaching career. But as they're beginning to discuss, Yanagisawa comes in and actually yell at her about the fact that she's dawdling and supposed to be taking notes, but is instead chatting with the Reaper, and proceeds to beat her over the head with her own clipboard, and points out that if it wasn't for her family connections, that she would be on the other side of that glass right now. And she merely apologizes and then slinks away, and Korosensei is hauled away into the next room for more experiments. And he points out that he's throughout this episode, it's implied that Korosensei outright states that he was trying to actually influence the role of the experiments to actually make himself stronger, for one thing, so that he can be a more effective assassin, but also that he could steer into his advantage so that he could actually kill all the scientists once the time came. So effectively he's trying to trick them into making him more powerful so that he can actually gain the abilities he needs to become a more effective assassin. But again, he goes to talk to Aguri again, who remarks that she's glad to see he's doing well, and also points out that that she's still trying to figure out quadratic equations to actually teach her students. But as she's talking about that, Yanagisawa actually comes in and begins to threaten her again, and reveals that they're actually fiancés. And which is kind of absurd considering that he abuses her, but it may be implied that it wasn't exactly by choice, considering that, again, her father is a benefactor of his company. So obviously Yanagisawa has a bit of influence, and it's implied that it may be more of a business arrangement than an actual marriage. So yeah, but as they're arguing, Korosensei actually gets a read on their frequency levels, and then knocks out Yanagisawa by knocking the glass between him and Aguri with a certain frequency, knocking Yanagisawa out so they could continue to talk. And he points out that he only knocked him out, and that now she doesn't have to worry about him, and now they can talk. And points out that he probably won't be beating her over the head in front of him anytime soon. So now they can actually talk in peace. And sure enough, Yanagisawa actually allows it to happen. He lets them chat for a little bit in between experiments. And during this, she actually remarks that she's actually prepping the students to go to college, and Yanagisawa and Korosensei is quick to point out that they're going to have their work cut out for them, and also proceeds to start giving them life advice, pointing out that he tried to be a teacher and could serve as a teacher, and she asks if he would consider being one, and he says that he would, but points out that he wasn't very good at it the last time. Case in point, we know from personal experience that his former student took on his moniker, but how he actually took on his moniker has actually been a matter of mystery. And as we find out, the man that is currently known as the Reaper actually portrayed Korosensei and left him to be captured, which is how he wound up in Yanagisawa's facility. The new Reaper portrayed him, left him to his own devices, and then proceeded to go on to continue his legacy with a variety of different faces. So the Korosensei was ultimately captured because the student betrayed him. So he points out that he doesn't really feel like he's going to have much faith as a teacher going forward. She merely remarks that he could get a second chance if he tried. So yeah, it's clear that she has faith in him, but in case they're interrupted, and once again Korosensei is put back into experimentation, and as it's going through all the different experiments, he starts noticing peculiar changes in his body that are evidenced by the fact that he's eventually going to turn into Korosensei. Namely, that his body begins to become more elastic-like, and also he coughs up blood once or twice, which Yanagisawa prevents Aguri from actually interfering with, because as he points out, that's actually the result they were looking for, and that he'll probably be fine. And also one of the scientists asks Yanagisawa if Korosensei will ever actually try and kill them, but as Yanagisawa quickly points out, he's actually planned for that, because he made it an integral part of Korosensei's strategy that when the time comes, he'll try to take Aguri as a hostage, and that he put her there purposefully so that he would implant that idea in Korosensei's head. We find out. It's been implied up to this point, but this episode just kind of fully showcases Shiro's manipulation skills. And as Yanagisawa is just very, very, very aggressive in his strategies to actually manipulate people, and that hasn't really gone away even in the 2 years since then. So, but as the episode winds down, Korosensei and the Reaper, not Korosensei yet, but the Reaper and Aguri do begin to come close and do begin to become fast friends. But then he also explains that as they were chatting, a new group of kids, the kids that we're currently familiar with, are coming in and but unaware that 2 weeks later they're going to see the moon turn into a permanent crescent. So yeah, this episode just kind of builds to the idea of how Korosensei is eventually going to become, well, Korosensei. But it also does give a little bit of a glimpse into his backstory about how he became Korosensei, namely that Yanagisawa started infusing antimatter into his cells to try and replicate organic antimatter into his body. And we do find out a little bit more about Yanagisawa as a person. And while we find out that not only was he manipulative to people he saw as pawns, which was basically everybody, but that he didn't even treat his own fiance with respect, which kind of showcases just how evil a person he is. But yeah, this does set up the fact that Yanagisawa is kind of the main antagonist. If it wasn't evident up to this point, this solidly confirms it, because he created the antimatter tentacles, and this backstory confirms that. It's heavily implied that he's been creating the animated tentacles, and now it explains how, which kind of showcases that he's kind of responsible for all the major events in the series. So he is the main antagonist. This episode outright makes it a lot more obvious if it wasn't so already. So yeah, based on this episode, it seems that he's actually willing to blame others for his shortcomings, pointing out that he calls out Aguri for being slow when she's just trying to talk to the Reaper and pick his brain. And he's even willing to turn anybody he wants into a guinea pig, because he doesn't see other people as human. He just sees them as more experiments waiting to happen. So yeah, Yanagisawa is not a nice dude. That's the long and short of what I'm trying to say. Yanagisawa is not a nice dude. But in any case, that's my review of Assassination Classroom. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And also be sure to check out all my social links in the description below. My website's down there. You can also check out my Patreon and help support me down over there. My website will have a list of all the people who have supported me on Patreon. So if there are anybody who's there that have actually helped support me, then they will be on my website. Nobody's done that yet, but when it does happen, it will be there. And also be sure to follow me, check out my Twitter and my Discord. Again, specifically follow me on Twitter, because you get updates to what's going on. And then also, if you want to see more videos from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent video. It may or may not be this one. Whereas the bottom video is the video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me and what YouTube thinks you will like based on that. So if you want to try something new or more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But regardless of whether or not you do any or all of those things, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!